When I moved into my new apartment, I was thrilled to be starting fresh. The building was old but charming, with a creaky elevator and a narrow staircase that led to my unit on the 3rd floor. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The first few weeks were blissfully uneventful. I got used to the hum of city life outside my windows, the distant chatter of neighbors, and the occasional thumps from above or below. The only odd thing was the man in apartment 3B. I never caught his name. He was a thin, quiet man with thinning gray hair and dark, sunken eyes. We crossed paths in the hallways sometimes, but he never looked up, never acknowledged my presence. He moved with a strange, shuffling gait, always carrying a small black bag. I tried to be friendly, offering a smile or a nod whenever I saw him, but he ignored me completely. I figured he was just one of those people who preferred to keep to themselves, and I respected that. But something about him made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was around that time I started noticing the sounds. At first, it was just faint scratching, like something was moving inside the walls. It was most noticeable at night when everything else was quiet. I assumed it was rats or maybe a raccoon trapped somewhere. But the scratching grew louder and more frantic, echoing through the thin walls of my apartment. Then came the tapping. Soft at first, a rhythmic knock, 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 always at the same time every night, just after midnight. I tried to ignore it, but the sound drilled into my brain, keeping me awake. It seemed to be coming from the wall I shared with apartment 3B. One night, after hours of restless tossing and turning, I decided to confront the neighbor. I threw on a robe and stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the air heavy with a musty smell that seemed stronger than usual. I knocked on the door of 3 Billions, expecting no answer. To my surprise, the door creaked open a few inches. The apartment beyond was pitch dark, the only light coming from a flickering bulb in the hallway. "Hello?" I called, but there was no response. I pushed the door open a little more and took a hesitant step inside. The air was thick with a strange metallic scent, and the apartment was deathly silent. My heart pounded as I fumbled for a light switch, but my hand met only cold, bare wall. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something odd. The apartment was nearly empty, just a few pieces of old, mismatched furniture scattered about. But what caught my attention was the wall. The entire far wall was covered in scratches, deep gouges that had torn through the plaster, revealing the wooden beams beneath. The scratches formed a chaotic, tangled pattern, like someone had been desperately clawing at the wall for hours on end. I backed away, my skin crawling with unease. That's when I heard it, a soft, raspy breath coming from the shadows. I froze, my eyes scanning the darkness. There, in the corner, I saw him, the man from 3B, crouched on the floor, his back turned to me. He was muttering something under his breath, a low, frantic whisper that I couldn't quite make out. His hands were moving rapidly, clawing at the floorboards, pulling at something with frenzied desperation. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear me. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw it, what he was digging at. The floorboards had been pried up, revealing a small, dark hole beneath them. Inside the hole, something glinted in the faint light, a metal box, old and rusted. The man's hands were covered in blood, his fingernails torn and broken from the effort of pulling up the boards. He kept muttering, faster now, as if he was afraid of being caught. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, just stood there watching in horror as he reached into the hole and pulled out the box. For a moment, he just stared at it, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Then slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes were wide, filled with a terror that mirrored my own. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light, and his mouth moved silently as if trying to form words. He held the box out to me, his hands shaking. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Take it. I can't. I shook my head, backing away toward the door, but he scrambled forward on his hands and knees, thrusting the box at me. "Take it," he cried, louder now, his voice cracking with desperation. "You have to take it." I stumbled out into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind me. I could hear him on the other side, pounding on the door, screaming at me to take the box. His voice was shrill, filled with a panic that made my blood run cold. I ran back to my apartment, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could still hear him, his muffled cries echoing through the walls, growing more and more frantic. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The tapping had started again, louder than ever, reverberating through my skull. That night I didn't sleep. I sat huddled on my couch, jumping at every little noise, my eyes fixed on the wall I shared with 3B. The tapping continued, relentless and maddening, until finally, just before dawn, it stopped. The silence was deafening. The next morning I went to the building manager and told him everything. He seemed concerned but skeptical. We went up to 3 Billions together, but when he knocked, there was no answer. He used his master key to open the door, and I braced myself for what we might find. But the apartment was empty. Not just empty, completely bare, as if no one had lived there for years. The walls were smooth and unmarked, the floorboards intact. There was no sign of the man, no sign of the scratches or the box. The manager looked at me with a frown. "You sure this is the right apartment?" I nodded, feeling the cold grip of fear tightening around my heart. "I'm telling you, he was here last night. I saw him. I heard him." The manager shook his head. "This apartment's been vacant for months. No one's lived here since old Mr. Grayson passed away." I left the building that day, never to return. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened in apartment 3B, something that had left its mark on the man I'd seen and on me. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my new apartment, I hear it again, the soft, insistent tapping, like someone desperately trying to get out.